How's it going, everybody? So in this video, I want to talk a little bit about dopamine precursors and their probably relatively significant benefit towards athletic performance. So many videos over the last couple months, I've kind of like painted dopamine cursors in a negative light, mostly in reference to the average person who's not really trying to perform at the highest level as an athlete, basically explaining a lot of these people who are looking for like dopamine detoxing or dopamine hacking and looking towards kind of like dopamine boosting supplements. Dopamine boosting, I mean, that can mean a lot of different things. In order to basically offset what could otherwise be remedied by just getting basic nutrition, sleep, and exercise factors in check. A lot of people, the main reason why they're seeking dopamine precursors and, all these hacking dopamine and stuff like that, all these buzzwords, and even things like optimizing testosterone when they haven't actually been diagnosed clinically as having low T. A lot of the reason why people are seeking these things is because they lack balance in their life. They, generally speaking, do not need dopamine precursors. However, in regards to athletic performance, there is an extremely large potential benefit based on how we understand fatigue in the modern scientific community. So, all right. First of all, kind of disclaimer, I've been a personal trainer for over 10 years now. I've been training strength and conditioning for athletes for close to 6 years. And I myself have been an athlete pretty much my entire life, but been into competitive combat sports for about 4 years, give or take, competing myself, right? And right now I'm actually training multiple competitive athletes. So on top of that, going to school right now for PhD in nutrition science, and at the same time, my entire room is full of textbooks, and so I'm like always reading. I'm like addicted to it. It's a pretty bad habit, actually. No matter how many textbooks I read, I can't stop finding good deals on textbooks and just buying new ones, so I can never read them all. I have probably 10 different books on queue right now, and I'm cleaning my room right now, and it's mostly just textbooks and clothes all over the place. Anyway, so fatigue, okay? So the old school idea so first of all, let's define fatigue. What is fatigue? So fatigue is basically the inability to perform at a previous level, okay? That's like to put it basic, okay? But that can mean a lot of different things. And just because and a lot of times athletes can perform at a previous level, but it depends on the metric you're using, and also it depends on how you're gauging that performance, right? Are we talking about the amount of velocity the athlete is using? For example, if somebody is deadlifting 500 pounds, sometimes that bar speed can go down significantly, which can basically it could basically be a symbol for fatigue. It could basically reflect a degree of fatigue. Or if you're watching an athlete, like a jiu-jitsu athlete who's a grappler, and he is, you're gauging it based on, who he taps out or whatever, and he's always tapping out all the blue belts, and he's still tapping all the blue belts, but he's extremely exhausted while he's doing it. Clearly he's fatigued to some degree. So anyway, there's a lot of different types of fatigue. There is local muscular fatigue. Think about like burning out your bicep, doing bicep curls, or holding a guillotine for a long period of time. That's local muscular fatigue. And that is a physical kind of metabolic fatigue, where there's actual muscle damage and muscle like exhaustion, so to speak, right? There's actual metabolic byproducts in the bloodstream and in the muscles that are being produced from that type of fatigue. There's peripheral fatigue, neural fatigue, systemic fatigue, and And all of these have different symptomology and can be kind of gauged differently. So in the context of dopamine precursors, and basically why we want to be looking into this for athletes, is because there's one type of fatigue that really doesn't have a good metric of measuring, okay? And so that would be kind of what a lot of people call central nervous system fatigue, or CNS fatigue, which is not really accurate of a label. But basically this type of fatigue that we're talking about is like that mental exhaustion that you will get if you are, training really, really hard and you're just, you just feel like you want to go to sleep, okay? It's that feeling of lethargy, that feeling of like I can't think very well, I want to go to bed or just lay down and never wake up or something. Like these are pretty relatively extreme descriptions of the same thing. Or let's say, you lose motivation for training, or like you have sleeping problems and you feel extremely exhausted, but yet you can't sleep. These are all kind of symptoms that are dealing with the same kind of system of fatigue, the same kind of fatigue that we're talking about in this video. However, like the thing is, there are some studies that show this fatigue can be gauged using testosterone to cortisol ratios. However, generally speaking, even in athletes that reflect all the symptomology of clinical overtraining syndrome, which is basically this type of fatigue has built up to the point where it's like disease-like, right? It's extremely problematic and borderline deadly, where people develop like a chronic fatigue type syndrome. This is an extreme offshoot of this type of fatigue that's been let go on for far too long. And it can be, seen as burnout for a lot of people. And there's actually whole textbooks describing overtraining syndrome like this as basically a form of burnout. But anyway, so testosterone to cortisol ratio is a very kind of hit or miss metric, and it only really works after you pass the point of, damaging returns, where you're like, okay, you need a week off, basically. That's when you're going to see testosterone and cortisol go out, okay? Usually after training for an hour to 3 hours, there's like a transient short-term decrease in testosterone basically after training, and then it goes back up to baseline. And you hear a lot of dumb people say that testosterone increases from deadlifting, and it's like, no, it's the opposite. There's a decrease in testosterone and an increase in cortisol for a couple hours after training, and it goes back to baseline, right? But yeah, if you are chronically fatigued from training, this can go on for a very long time. The cortisol can stay elevated. So anyway, let's talk about. Okay, so now we have another idea of fatigue. This is called the central governor theory of training fatigue, and it was, from my understanding, popularized by Professor Timothy Noakes, who I got into due to his work on ketogenic metabolism for athletes, and how he wrote the textbook, the Book of Lore, or the Lore of Running, which was seen as like the Bible of running, and he realized he was wrong about carbohydrates, and that ketogenic diets, athletes may not need carbohydrates, at least in the context of endurance running. But anyway, he not only pioneered kind of like the shift in ideas on low-carb dieting for athletes, but also he was one of the biggest popularizers of the central governor theory of training fatigue. Because basically what he was looking at is endurance athletes hitting the wall, where they basically just cannot, they hit a point where they might even be like a mile away from the finish line in a 100-mile race, and they're almost to the finish line, but for some reason, when they get that close to the finish line, their body seems to just give up on them, where they just cannot push push past it. And he was wondering, well, why is it that some athletes can and some athletes cannot? And basically, they looked at muscle biopsies and stuff like that, and they found that it wasn't really the carbohydrates that were limiting the performance, and also that it wasn't like muscular. Like there wasn't like a muscular failure element that was stopping them from the race, or even their cardiovascular capacity. And basically, what they came to the conclusion was the idea that it was actually a buildup of serotonin in the circulation as a result of the hard training, basically pushing your body to the absolute, or basically harder than it's been pushed on a regular basis before. And the symptomology that comes with this type of training fatigue, this phenomena, it happens when if you're a powerlifter and you're lifting really close to your maxes. Let's say you're hitting like 3 sets of close to a 5 rep max. That's like really hard. There's like no reps left in reserve on those sets. You will feel this type of fatigue, and over time your body will get used to it. But basically, and the same thing happens in grappling. You see this all the time. You'll have athletes, they're doing 5-minute rounds or something like that, right? Really common, Monday through Friday or something, just 5-minute rounds of live rolling. People who are not used to that, of course will get sore and stuff like that. But even people who are used to it, if they go harder than usual, that feeling of, man, afterwards, I am exhausted, I am wiped out. That is probably the central governor theory, probably serotonin building up and making you feel lethargic. A lot of people mistakenly label serotonin as like the happy chemical, when in fact it's not. The pleasure chemical that people feel is actually most likely endorphin, as well as endocannabinoids, so like CBD and stuff like that, which would explain why smoking cannabis, for example, makes people feel euphoric or feeling the pleasure and stuff like that, and generally makes them lazy. It's probably because of the increase in the end result of what achievement usually gives them, right? Not to say that all cannabis users are lazy, but that's just an explanation. So serotonin is not the pleasure chemical. It's not the happiness chemical. Endocannabinoid, oxytocin, endorphin, those are pleasure chemicals. Those are happiness chemicals. Okay? Trust me. And people take something like 5-HTP, they might find they feel relaxed and good for a while, but eventually they hit a point where they just start to feel lethargic and restless, and it doesn't work, and numb. And you see this with a lot of people who take supplements like ashwagandha and some of these things that lower cortisol and specifically increase I think the HT1 receptor expression of serotonin. So basically, a lot of serotoninogenic type compounds can make you just numb and lose all pleasure in life, which is contrary to what you'll generally hear people think serotonin is. So realistically, serotonin makes you feel lethargic and basically like you're in a food coma is really how it makes you feel. Surprisingly enough, that is actually what happens when you eat food, is stuff yourself. There is a large spike in serotonin. It has nothing to do with tryptophan. Usually has to do with the high insulin spike from the large amount of calories you just consumed, indirectly stimulating serotonin pathways, making you feel lethargic. And basically, the mechanism involved in having the itis from overstuffing yourself with food is the same mechanism as exercising to the point where you feel exhausted. It's a central governor theory, the idea that your brain is literally trying to stop you from what it perceives as killing yourself by producing serotonin, okay? And so when you stuff yourself beyond your normal capacity to eat on Thanksgiving or at the buffet or something, not because of tryptophan, like people will say from turkey, is so stupid. Tryptophan is in all protein foods, and no matter how much tryptophan is concentrated in a protein source, there's all the other amino acids packaged with it that are going to compete for absorption. You're not going to feel a substantial serotonin boost from a high tryptophan food and a protein peptide package. And if you isolate it and take it on an empty stomach, the tryptophan, then you would. But yeah, so anyone that tells you that it's tryptophan, it's like just ignore them, because it's not true. But the large spike in especially carbohydrates, but also just calories in general, will generally indirectly stimulate serotonin pathways and various receptors of serotonin can bind to, which can make you feel lethargic. And that idea behind that is that basically your body's like, fuck, you almost basically, what'd you do, like eat a rabbit? You know what I mean? Like a whole freaking animal. It wants you to lay down and relax. You've already hunted, you already killed something. And basically it's sending a signal that, hey, we need to protect this guy because he just like ate an entire like city of animals, basically. Same thing goes for like when you do like a hardcore competition or something like that. There's a surge of dopamine usually, and you're going hard, and there's a bunch of catecholamines being produced like cortisol. And then at the end of the training session or the end of the competition, you just feel like, man, exhausted. The competition, you'll feel endorphin and stuff like that, though, and that will make you feel better and more energized. However, and lots of dopamine and adrenaline, too, so that's a little bit different. However, what I'm trying to get to is that the central governor theory is the idea that the brain tries to stop you from killing yourself if you go too hard with too high a volume during training, okay? This could be too much volume. So if you're an athlete doing rounds, like let's say you're a combat athlete, you're sparring 5-minute rounds, because that's a magical number, and you're used to doing 3-minute rounds. Well, 5-minute rounds is a whole lot more than you're used to. That's 2 extra rounds and two more minutes than you're used to. That's a lot more volume. That means volume, okay? That's a volume increase. More minutes and more rounds. That's volume. Almost twice as much volume, but not quite. It's a lot more volume, though. And that's a huge jump, and it's going to produce a lot of this type of neural fatigue, or whatever you want to call it. A lot of central governor theory is likely to happen. Maybe not the first time, maybe not the second time, but if you do it 3 days in a row, you're going to feel like you need some time off. And this is serotonin building up in the periphery, or in the circulation, or the nervous system, or whatever you want to call it. And it's not necessarily just like serotonin from amino acids, free floating around the blood. It's more complex than that, but there's more serotoninogenic activity, you can think of it as. Now here's the thing, and this is the main point of this video, is that taking dopamine precursors, including caffeine, this is most likely, they help tremendously in offsetting this type of fatigue effect. And, there's a lot of people, average people who aren't athletes, who take L-tyrosine and meconiprins, dopamine precursors, to boost their motivation, boost their energy, and even it's been studied in military, and it was a study up to 3 months, and they were taking like 15 grams, that's a shit ton of tyrosine, dopamine precursor, to offset sleep deprivation, and like boot camp or hell week or whatever it was, like extremely stressful military simulation combat or whatever. And they find an increase in reaction time, an increase in performing under stress and pressure, and a dramatic increase in cognitive abilities during sleep deprivation. And so I found, during periods of time where I'm like doing college, for example, and I'm doing a lot of like essays, and I'm staying awake for like 3 days in a row to try to get an essay done or something. God bless my soul. Taking tyrosine is a godsend for kind of like preventing me from crashing. Like I could stay awake for 3 days straight and perform at a high level and be extremely energetic, enthusiastic if I'm taking a dopamine precursor. And if you can just imagine people that take these hardcore stimulants like cocaine and shit like that, or Adderall is a better example. These things basically just artificially stimulate the release of dopamine. They're not as sustainable and healthy as something like L-tyrosine, because tyrosine has like two regulatory enzymes that can kind of rate-limiting enzymes that can stop tyrosine from being converted so much that you're like a damn like crack addict or something and become reliant on it, build a tolerance and shit. Tyrosine is amazing because a lot of people kind of report being able to take it for years at a time with no tolerance or no side effects. Like maybe there would be a slightly lowered perceived benefit over time, but that's just because you're getting used, subjectively you're perceiving the increased dopamine as like a regular thing. But logically and rationally, like on paper, the effects are just the same. It's just you're kind of getting used to it over time. There's no tolerance. People always report that with tyrosine. And some people even with mucuna, but that's a little bit deeper of a story. So anyway, studies show that tyrosine is tremendous at offsetting this type of neural fatigue, whatever it might be. The same type of fatigue that builds up during the workday. If you've ever like had a sit down job where you're dealing with customers all day and stuff, it'll produce that same kind of mushy brain feeling that you get during hard training sessions or when you're sleep deprived. That is likely all has to do with neurotransmitters that are opposite to dopamine. And so for those who don't know, dopamine is actually an antagonist to serotonin. You could think of it that way, although it's a lot more complicated, the relationship between them all. But when you take L-tyrosine, you're basically offsetting the central governor theory. And what you got to understand, a lot of people might hear this and be like, well, the self-governor theory is to prevent me from killing myself, right? The problem is, physically, you can have this serotonin-type lethargy and fatigue for months, and you can keep improving performance. You can improve cardiovascular performance from your training. You can improve your strength in powerlifting training, provided you're training properly. Recommending the 3-part exercise training programming series by Barrow Medicine. That will prevent neural fatigue from even building up in the first place, let alone you getting injured. However, if you know how to program properly, man, you can fucking get strong even 3 months into a program where you're already feeling like, lack of motivation, feeling lethargic and shit from the serotonin buildup. So anyway, it's not a physical thing. It's not like, you feel the fatigue and it's essential governor theory, you know what I mean? And like, you got to stop training or you're going to die. It's not like that. It's just your brain is like freaking out with this regulatory mechanism. It's not actually grounded in any kind of like true danger reality. Unless you're a marathon athlete, because that's a little bit different, because you're putting your heart under such tremendous mileage every single day. You better listen to the science to an extent and mix up your training a little bit. Anyway, that's probably also why we have the phenomenon known as training stillness. So training stillness is an idea in exercise science where basically if you do the same training program over and over again for months and months on end, same reps or rounds or whatever, training the same quality, whether it's speed or power or strength, over and over again, you hit a plateau. You start to hit a plateau. Your improvements in training start to slow down over time, and you start to get more and more of this neural fatigue, feeling like lack of motivation. You get depression and shit like that. And there's programs where you just do a 1-rep max every single day, Bulgarian method, Bulgarian light, and, they call it the dark times. People are all scared of that. It's kind of stupid. And basically, you go through like a depression and shit if you do the same thing over and over again. You don't want to hit the gym anymore. And that's why we have things like periodization, where you go through different phases, working different qualities and characteristics. The thing is, novelty actually boosts dopamine. Novelty is a primary way of like keeping that dopamine active. That's why pornography websites and Facebook and all these things that have endless novelty and endless scrolling are so freaking addictive. Or like Tinder, you're swiping through novel females over and over again. It is a very dopamine boosting, hijacking type of activity. Well, first of all, that's why dopamine fasting and stuff like that makes people feel so much more motivated and happy. they're literally resensitizing their sensitivity to the stimulus from a neurotransmitter perspective. And Harvard neuroscientist, you might not like him because he's kind of whatever, gimmicky, I guess. But Andrew Huberman has great podcasts on this that are very practical and relevant. Like, you will literally notice your motivation come right back if you stop grinding out sets of 5 on squats and you start doing sets of 10 on box squats. Change the variation, change the rep scheme. Or if you've been training at the same gym over and over again and they just train the same techniques with the same people, same methods over and over again, people notice a brand new feeling of inspiration if they just change the gym that they train at. As much as that might sound not good, it's because changing the training environment changes the stimulus dramatically. That's the number one. People go from a commercial gym or whatever, training at one sports facility to another, and all of a sudden they start hitting PRs and stuff, and they'll come up with all sorts of justifications. But a big one is that dopamine is directly correlated with force output, with your reaction time, with your motivation to push forward. And dopamine is huge in training performance. Another thing is just adding novelty to your training routine, changing it up, doing some form of periodization. It may not be necessary to keep progressing to do periodization and change things up. It's not muscle confusion. It's a real phenomenon. You will probably benefit from such a thing, right? And then you have undulating periodization, which is great, especially if you just are a scatterbrain person. Anyway, you're just changing the rep scheme every session instead of every block of training. So then you have, so here's another point to understand is that dopamine seems to be a indirect kind of stimulator of like testosterone and androgenic type activity. Okay, now this might be controversial. You may not see it in the short term. This is probably why studies don't pick it up. So things like tribulus, which seems to boost dopaminergic activity over time, particularly the density of dopamine receptors, certain dopamine receptors, not all of them, and things like maca root. And then especially things like tyrosine and mucuna-prurins. Mucuna actually does have studies showing it seems to boost testosterone activity, which is a dopamine precursor, among other things. But basically, and generally speaking, with these testosterone boosters and stuff, where people swear that they see benefits, usually you see benefits in your strength production from these types of compounds over time. Because when you train, okay, we're not talking like drug-like compounds. Okay, you don't get stronger within one training session. You get stronger over the weeks and months that these training sessions accumulate adaptations. So you go into training and you stimulate an adaptation, and then you go home, you eat, you recover from the fatigue. You come in the next day and you simulate another adaptation. And it's like a stair-stepping process. Every training session is simulating an improvement over time. And that's why over the months, you might see a dramatic improvement in your performance from like a dopamine precursor supplement because you're improving your sensitivity to training because you have more dopamine. But studies are usually only like a couple weeks in duration, so they're not going to generally find this, right? Because it hasn't given them enough time to accumulate the stacking of training sessions. But anyway, things like rhodiola as well, shown to improve exercise performance, training performance. Things like cordyceps. Cordyceps been shown in studies to improve the testosterone to cortisol ratio in trained athletes and elite level athletes over a 3-month period. And that was combined with reishi mushroom. But reishi mushroom actually has been shown to protect dopamine neurons, and cordyceps seems to boost the upregulation or regulatory mechanisms of dopamine receptors over time. So anyway, back to L-tyrosine. So those are just examples of supplements that kind of regulate and protect dopamine and have been shown in studies on a hormonal level to improve exercise performance. And cordyceps seems to boost the recycling of glycolytic energy system and glycolysis. Think, aerobic capacity or anaerobic capacity work, like 90 seconds of all-out effort, like a wrestling scramble or something. Anyway, or 400-meter dash, 600-meter dash, I don't know. But dopamine precursors, they can improve your exercise performance and training adaptations by buffering serotonin, by reducing the effects that the serotoninogenic buildup from the central governor theory might have on fatigue. And so for me, when I'm training hard for competition, man, I have a hard time. Because after my weight training sessions, I'll usually feel exhausted. Caffeine these days doesn't help as much. Carbing up doesn't help as much, yada, yada. And then I go into my grappling sessions, and it's like people that I have way better skill than, I'm in way better shape than, I'm like, man, I just don't have the drive. Like, I'll see opportunities there. I'm like, it's because I'm like so neurally fatigued. You take a week off and the serotonin buildup goes down and you feel motivated again and you're good to go, but it's hard to sustain high training volumes and frequency without taking so many rest days over time if you constantly have this buildup of serotonin making you lethargic and lowering your force output. But when I take L-tyrosine, and interchange that with DL-phenylalanine supplements and Mucuna, all my G's. Like, I have basically, every day I can come in and just feel like a killer, man. Just like destroy the training. And I've actually found out of every supplement or herb or nutrition technique I've ever done, besides like a low carb, high protein, high fruit type of diet, I found the biggest performance boost I get is from L-tyrosine and dopamine precursors, specifically tyrosine, combined with caffeine especially. And tyrosine, when I take it, I seem to be able to lower my dose of caffeine as well. I don't need as much caffeine. So, it's just a profound type of change, and it all has to do with central governor theory and offsetting some of these, like, neural fatigue type symptoms that are mostly from neurotransmitter buildup. And so again, just to kind of compound this, I believe that the central governor theory, there might be more to it. It might not be exactly what's going on, the buildup of serotonin, that we need more mechanistic evidence. However, the fact that I take L-tyrosine and that freaking serotonin type feeling, that lethargy, that fatigue buildup completely vanishes, tells me it seems to be, it does seem to be, because it's antagonizing serotonin. That seems to be what's going on. It seems to be correct. I think Timothy Noakes might be onto something there. And just one more thing I'll say is I have heard a lot of athletes use stimulants like Adderall. I know John Jones is on record saying he slams cocaine before his fights or something. And a lot of people compare L-tyrosine to Adderall and its feelings and effects. And I guess, I literally just went hard, did a hardcore training session. I was dancing to my music the whole time in front of the whole gym. I didn't give a fuck. Just feeling amazing. I can definitely say, I have been on Adderall when I was like 9, but I can definitely say it pumps you up and makes you feel like you're on top of the world. So I assume that might be the way it makes you feel. But a lot of people kind of take Adderall to do such a thing. But the interesting thing is people take Adderall will also take L-tyrosine to offset the crash and the come down that comes with it. Because generally Adderall kind of uses up a lot of your amino acids and stuff because it just kind of releases dopamine without the building blocks. The L-tyrosine is giving you the building blocks that you need. And, of course, you drink caffeine with it, and now you got a building block of dopamine and then the caffeine releasing it. So basically it offsets the tolerance to a lot of these stimulants because it gives you the building blocks that are probably being used up. So, and that's probably why a lot of people find that they benefit energy-wise from taking dopamine precursors, even if they have a high-protein diet, just because they're probably using up all their damn dopamine from all the damn stimulants. And this just basically gives you more building blocks. And why they don't have a tolerance, because you're not really, causing upregulation of dopamine receptors. So anyway, just figured I'd share this because it's something I've kind of recognized recently, or this whole year. It's like the freaking magic piece of the puzzle. Pretty much the most significant training or exercise performance boosting supplement, motivation boosting supplement, and everything that you can take probably year-round, most people. If you take the right doses of it, L-tyrosine is your ticket. So leave your question, comments down below, and I'll talk to y'all next time.